Okay, so have you ever felt like uh, setting up a new server or, configuring a whole network?
Hmm.
It's like walking through a maze blindfolded, right?
Absolutely.
There's so many like manual steps and configurations, and it's easy to miss something.
Can be a real headache.
Yeah. Well, today we're diving into something that aims to like completely change that whole process.
Oh,
It's
exciting.
called infrastructure as code, or
Oh,
IAC for short.
right. IAC, I've heard of that.
Yeah, basically, instead of manually configuring everything by hand.
Yeah.
We're talking about defining and managing your entire IT infrastructure with code.
Code. So like writing scripts to set up servers and stuff.
Exactly. It's almost like treating your infrastructure setup like you would any other software project.
Interesting. So instead of clicking around in a user interface, I'd be writing code to define what I want my infrastructure to look like.
Yeah, and the beauty of it is that it brings so many benefits like automation, consistency, scalability.
I'm starting to see how this could be a game changer.
Right. And for this deep dive, we've got some really interesting sources to work with, some articles, even a YouTube transcript.
Cool. A good mix of perspectives.
Yeah, and they all dive into what IAC is, why it's so important these days, and how it actually works in practice.
Sounds like a lot to unpack.
It is. But our mission here is to really distill those sources down to the core insights, to give everyone listening a clear and engaging understanding of what IAC is all about and why it's so crucial for modern IT.
I like it. Cutting through the noise and getting to the good stuff.
Exactly. So let me ask you this. Have you ever wished that you could just like hit a button
Mm-hmm.
and have your entire infrastructure like magically appear exactly the way you need it?
Oh, wouldn't that be nice?
That's kind of the promise of IAC.
Sounds almost too good to be true.
Well, let's dive in and see how it actually works. So
Mm-hmm.
to start, I think it's helpful to understand the core principles that underpin IAC.
Right, the foundations.
Exactly. And luckily, our first article kind of lays out 6 key ideas
Uh-huh.
that really define what IAC is all about.
Okay, 6 pillars of ISC.
So first up, we have automation.
Okay, automation. I mean, that makes sense, right?
Right. It's like the cornerstone of IAC. It's all about letting machines handle those tedious and repetitive tasks that we used to do manually.
Yeah, no more clicking through endless menus or typing the same commands over and over again.
Exactly. And not only does that save a ton of time, but it also drastically reduces the chance of human error
Because, let's be honest, we all make mistakes, especially when we're doing things manually.
all the time. And those errors can be costly, right?
Absolutely, especially when it comes to IT infrastructure.
Yeah. So automation's like this huge win right off the bat.
Definitely a good starting point. And what's next on the list?
So the second principle is consistency.
Consistency.
And this is another big one. With IAC, you're ensuring that your infrastructure configurations are uniform across all your environments.
So like development, testing, production, all exactly the same.
Precisely. No more of those like, it works on my machine type of scenarios.
Yeah, those are the worst.
Right. Because those are often caused by like subtle differences in configuration between environments.
Yeah, one little setting can throw everything off.
And consistency really boosts reliability. It means things behave predictably and you're less likely to run into surprises when you deploy to production.
Makes sense. So automation and consistency, those are two big wins already. What else do we have?
Okay, so the third principle is scalability.
Scalability, all right.
And this is crucial because as your needs grow or maybe even shrink,
Yeah, businesses are always changing.
right, IEC allows you to easily and quickly adjust your infrastructure resources without having to like manually reconfigure a bunch of stuff.
So if I suddenly need to handle a lot more traffic, I can just spin up more servers with a few lines of code.
That's the idea. It's about being able to respond to those changing demands really, really quickly.
That kind of agility is super valuable in today's world.
It is.
Yeah.
And underlying that agility is the fourth principle, which is version control.
Version control, okay. That rings a bell.
So you know how software developers use tools like Git to track changes to their code?
Yeah, makes it easy to collaborate and roll back if something goes wrong.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, ISE lets you do the same thing, but for your infrastructure setup.
Hmm. So I can see a history of all the changes that have been made to my infrastructure.
You got it. You can see who changed what and when.
Hmm.
And if something breaks, you can easily revert back to a previous working state.
Oh, that's a lifesaver.
It really is.
Yeah.
And it makes collaborating on infrastructure changes much, much easier.
So it's like bringing the best practices of software development to the world of infrastructure.
Exactly. Okay, now the fifth principle is repeatability.
Repeatability.
So because your infrastructure is defined in code, You can spin up identical environments time and time again.
Ah, so like if I need to set up a new testing environment.
Yeah, you don't have to start from scratch every time. You just run your code and boom, you have an exact replica of your production environment.
That's incredible. It would save so much time and effort.
It would. And it's also super valuable for disaster recovery.
Right, if something happens to your production environment.
You can just spin up a new one from your ISE code and you're back in business.
Okay, repeatability, definitely a big plus. So what's the last principle?
Okay, the sixth one is testability.
Testability, so like testing my infrastructure code
You got it. Just like you would test your software code.
to make sure there are no bugs.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this is where ISE starts to really mature as a discipline. You can apply the same rigorous testing practices to your infrastructure as you do to your applications.
So I can catch potential problems before they actually affect my live systems.
Precisely. It's
Yeah.
all about preventing those late night fire drills.
Yeah, nobody wants those.
So those are the 6 core principles of IAC automation: consistency, scalability, version control, repeatability, and testability.
Okay, that's quite a list, but it makes sense when you think about it.
It does, right?
Yeah.
It's about bringing the rigor and efficiency of software development to the world of infrastructure.
And ultimately making our lives as IT professionals a lot easier.
Absolutely. So let me try to crystallize all this for you with an analogy.
Okay, I like analogies.
So imagine you're baking a cake, right?
A cake. Okay, I'm following.
Yeah, without a recipe, you might forget an ingredient or, mismeasure something.
Yeah, every cake would turn out differently.
Right. Some might be good, some might be a disaster.
And you wouldn't know why.
Exactly. But with a precise recipe,
Okay.
you get the same delicious cake every single time.
Ah, I see. So the recipe is like the ISC code.
Precisely. It defines exactly what you need and how to put it all together.
And if one cake doesn't rise properly, you can look back at the recipe and see what went wrong.
Exactly. That's like version control.
Yeah.
You can track all the changes and figure out where things went awry.
Okay. That's a really helpful analogy.
So IEC is like having that perfect recipe for your entire IT infrastructure.
Love it. Okay, now I'm curious about how this recipe actually gets executed. Like, what are the different ways to actually do IAC?
That's a great question. And our first article actually highlights 2 main approaches to IAC: declarative and imperative.
Declarative and imperative.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I've heard those terms before, but I'm not sure I fully understand the distinction.
Yeah, so think of it like this. Declarative IAC is all about defining the desired end state of your infrastructure.
A desired end state.
Right. So you're basically saying, I want 2 web servers with this specific configuration, a database with these settings, a network with these rules, and so on.
And the ISC tool figures out how to make it happen.
Exactly. You're focusing on the what, not the how.
So I don't need to specify every single command or step.
Not at all. The tool takes care of all that.
Okay, and what are some examples of declarative IAC tools?
Some popular ones are Terraform, AWS CloudFormation, and Azure Resource Manager, which is often shortened to ARM.
Right, I've heard of those.
Yeah.
And what about imperative IAC? How is that different?
So the YouTube transcript actually does a really good job of contrasting these 2 approaches.
Okay, let's see what they have to say.
So with imperative IAC, you're giving a much more specific, step-by-step set of instructions on how to achieve your desired infrastructure configuration.
So it's more like writing a traditional script.
Exactly. You're saying first do this, then do that, then do this other thing.
Okay, and what kind of tools fall into this category?
Some well-known examples are Ansible and Chef.
Right, configuration management tools.
Exactly. And the video actually gives a really helpful example to illustrate the difference between these 2 approaches.
Okay, let's hear it.
So let's say you're using an imperative tool like Ansible to create 2 EC2 instances on AWS.
Okay, 2 virtual machines.
Right. Now, if you run that Ansible configuration multiple times,
Yeah.
it's likely going to try to create 2 more EC2 instances each time.
Oh, so you could end up with like 4, 6, 8 instances?
Exactly, leading to all sorts of unintended duplicates and wasted resources.
Yikes. That sounds like a recipe for trouble.
It can be,
Mhm.
but the video explains that with a declarative tool like OpenTofu,
OpenTofu.
yeah, it's very similar to Terraform,
Okay.
you would define that you want exactly 2 EC2 instances.
Okay.
And the tool maintains this thing called a state file.
State file. What's that?
It's basically a record of the currently provisioned infrastructure.
Ah, so it knows what's already been created.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So if you run your OpenTofu configuration again,
Right.
it compares the current state with your desired state, which is 2 instances,
Right.
and realizes that no changes are needed.
So it doesn't create any duplicates.
Exactly. It's all about the intended outcome, not the specific steps to get there.
Okay, I'm starting to see the power of the declarative approach.
It's very elegant.
Yeah.
And another cool thing that the video mentions is that this declarative approach also helps manage configuration drift.
Configuration drift.
Yeah, so that's when changes are made to your infrastructure outside of your IAC tool.
So like someone manually logging into a server and changing a setting?
Exactly. That can happen.
Right, it does.
But with the declarative IAC tool, the next time you run your configuration,
Yeah.
it will automatically detect those discrepancies and bring everything back into alignment.
Oh, so it's like self-healing.
It is.
Yeah.
And that's a huge advantage because it helps prevent those, slow and subtle deviations from your desired state that can cause problems down the road.
Yeah, configuration drift can be a real headache to track down.
It can. So for you, the listener, the key question to consider is this. Do you prefer to give someone a detailed step-by-step manual for a task?
Like a really specific set of instructions?
Or do you just tell them what the final result should look like and trust them to figure out the best way to get there?
That's a great way to frame the difference between imperative and declarative IAC.
Right. It's about control versus trust.
And I guess the right approach depends on your specific needs and preferences.
Exactly. Okay, so now that we have a good grasp of the underlying principles and the two main ways of working with IAC,
Yeah.
let's look at the actual tools that are out there.
The tools of the trade.
Exactly. And luckily, our first article and the YouTube transcript give us a really good overview of some of the most popular options.
Cool, a toolbox for IAC.
And the video actually does a nice job of categorizing them based on their primary function.
Okay, that's all.
So the first category they highlight is configuration management.
Configuration management, I'm familiar with that.
Yeah, so this includes tools like Ansible Chef Puppet and Salt Stack.
Yeah, I've used Ansible before.
And the main goal here, as the video explains, is to manage and configure software on existing infrastructure resources.
So things like installing packages, updating configurations, making sure services are running properly.
Exactly. It's about ensuring that your servers and databases are in the desired state.
Right. Keeping everything running smoothly.
And the video also emphasizes this really important concept called idempotency.
Idempotency, that's a mouthful.
It is, but it's a really important idea. Basically, it means that you can run your configuration code multiple times.
Okay.
And it will always bring your system to the desired state without causing any unintended side effects.
So it only makes the changes that are actually necessary.
Exactly. It won't keep reinstalling the same package over and over again.
Ah, that makes sense. And what's the next category of tools?
Okay, so the second category is server templating.
Server templating, all right?
And this is where tools like Packer Vagrant and Docker come in.
Oh, Docker, I've heard of that.
Yeah, Docker's huge these days.
It is. So what's server templating all about?
So it's focused on creating reusable images or blueprints for your servers or containers.
Okay, like a template for a virtual machine.
Exactly. And these templates have all the necessary software and configurations pre-installed.
So when I need a new server, I just spin up an instance from this template.
That's the idea. It's like a cookie cutter for servers.
I like it. Very efficient.
It is. And as the video points out, this approach really promotes what's called immutable infrastructure.
Immutable infrastructure, that sounds interesting.
It is.
Yeah.
So traditionally, when you needed to make changes to a server,
Yeah.
you would log in and update packages or modify configurations.
Right. The old school way.
Exactly. But with immutable infrastructure,
Okay.
you don't touch the running server at all.
You don't.
Instead, you update the underlying image or template,
Right.
and then you deploy a brand new instance from that updated image.
Ah, so it's like a fresh start every time.
It is. And it's much cleaner and more reliable because you're eliminating those ad hoc changes that can introduce inconsistencies.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So what's the last category?
Okay, the third and final category is infrastructure provisioning, sometimes called orchestration.
Infrastructure provisioning. So this is about actually setting up the infrastructure itself, right?
Exactly. This is where tools like OpenTofu Terraform, AWS CloudFormation, and Azure Resource Manager come into play.
Okay, some big names there.
They are. And these tools are designed to handle the heavy lifting of actually provisioning your infrastructure components.
So like creating virtual machines, setting up networks, configuring storage, and all that.
Precisely. It's the foundation upon which everything else is built.
Got it.
Well,
And it's worth noting that some of these tools are cloud specific, right?
You're right. Like AWS CloudFormation is specifically for Amazon Web Services. And Azure Resource Manager is tailored for Microsoft Azure.
Makes sense. But Terraform is cloud agnostic, right?
Exactly. Our article highlights that Terraform can manage infrastructure across multiple cloud providers.
So if you're working in a multi-cloud environment,
Terraform's a good choice.
it is. And the video also mentions OpenTofu as a vendor-neutral option.
Yeah, OpenTofu is a really interesting open source project.
Cool. So lots of options to choose from depending on your needs.
There are. And the YouTube video actually gives a really practical piece of advice.
Okay, let's hear it.
They recommend using provisioning tools like OpenTofu or Terraform to set up the foundational infrastructure,
Okay.
and then using configuration management tools like Ansible or Chef for tasks like installing and configuring software on those newly provisioned resources.
Yeah, they work together.
They do. They kind of complement each other.
Ah, that's a good strategy. So for our listeners out there,
Yeah,
the key takeaway here is that there's no one-size-fits-all solution.
exactly. It really depends on your specific needs.
Right, like are you all in on one cloud provider or are you juggling multiple clouds?
Yep, that's a big factor.
And what kind of infrastructure are you managing? What are your automation goals?
Lots of things to consider.
It is. But hey, that's what makes this field so interesting, right?
It does. Okay, so we've talked about the principles, the approaches, the tools.
We've covered a lot of ground.
We have. But now I think it's time to address the big why.
A why.
Yeah, why should anyone invest the time and effort into adopting IAC?
Right, what's in it for me?
Exactly.
Hmm?
What are the real, tangible benefits?
Yeah, let's talk about the payoff.
And luckily, our sources are all pretty aligned on this front.
Okay, good to know.
So one of the most immediate benefits is increased agility and speed.
Agility and speed. All right, I like the sound of that.
Right. So by automating the provisioning and deployment of your infrastructure,
Yeah.
you can get new environments up and running much, much faster than with manual processes.
So no more waiting weeks or even months to get a new server set up.
Exactly.
Wow.
IAC can drastically shorten those lead times.
That's huge, especially in today's fast-paced world.
It is. And often that speed translates directly into reduced costs.
Reduce costs even better.
Right.
Yeah.
Because when you automate tasks, you're minimizing the potential for human errors.
Yeah, those errors can be expensive.
They can lead to downtime, rework, all sorts of things.
And plus, efficient resource management through code can also save you money.
Absolutely. You can ensure that you're not over-provisioning resources or leaving things running when you don't need them.
Right, optimization through automation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, another big benefit is improved consistency and reliability.
Consistency and reliability, we've touched on that before.
We have, but it's worth emphasizing again. With IA, you're defining your infrastructure in code,
Yeah.
which means that every environment is configured in exactly the same way.
So no more inconsistencies between development testing and production.
Precisely. And that makes your systems much more stable and predictable.
Because you're eliminating those subtle differences that can cause unexpected problems.
Exactly. It's all about reducing surprises.
Makes sense. And what about security? Is IAC good for security?
It can be a huge win for security.
Okay, good to hear.
So IAC allows you to codify and enforce your security policies directly within your infrastructure configurations.
Ah, so the security rules are baked right into the code.
Exactly. And the automated nature also makes it much easier to perform regular security audits.
Because you have a clear record of everything.
You do. And both the first article and the YouTube transcript actually talk about how IAC supports this idea of shift-left security.
Shift-left security, I'm not familiar with that term.
So it basically means integrating security considerations from the very beginning of the development lifecycle.
So not just tacking it on at the end.
Exactly. It's about building security in from the ground up.
Okay, that makes sense. And IAC can help with that.
It can, because when you're defining your infrastructure as code, you can include security best practices right from the start.
Ah, so it's not an afterthought.
It's part of the process.
That's a great way to approach security.
It is. Okay, now another benefit of IAC is better collaboration.
Better collaboration, how so?
So when your infrastructure is defined as code and managed in a version control system like Git,
Yeah.
it becomes much easier for teams to work together on infrastructure changes.
Ah, because they can see the history of changes, review each other's work?
Precisely. It's like bringing that collaborative workflow from software development into the world of infrastructure.
Right, so no more working in silos.
Exactly. It's all about transparency and shared responsibility.
I like it. And what about disaster recovery? Can IC help with that?
Absolutely. In fact, it can be a game changer for disaster recovery.
Okay, how so?
So imagine this. If a disaster strikes,
Knock on wood.
yeah, but it happens, right?
It does.
With IC, you can rapidly and consistently recreate your entire infrastructure from your code.
Oh, wow. So you can get back up and running much faster.
Exactly.
Yeah.
No more scrambling to remember all the manual steps or trying to piece things together from scratch.
That would save a ton of time and stress in a crisis situation.
It would. And the infrastructure as code, IAC.pdf document, actually highlights another benefit:
Okay, let's hear it.
streamlined compliance.
Compliance always a fun topic.
I know, right? But it's important.
It is. So how does IAC help with compliance?
So because your infrastructure configurations are version controlled and auditable,
Yeah.
it becomes much easier to demonstrate compliance with various regulatory requirements.
So like GDPR, HIPAA, PCI, DSS, all this fun acronyms?
Exactly. You have a clear and auditable record of your infrastructure state over time.
Ah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
And I guess auditors would love that.
They would. It makes their lives much easier.
Good for them.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've talked about agility, cost savings, consistency, security collaboration, disaster recovery compliance. What else is there?
Well, we've kind of touched on it, but it's worth stating explicitly.
Okay.
IAC fundamentally automates your infrastructure.
Right, that's the whole point.
It is. And that frees up valuable IT personnel from those repetitive manual tasks.
So they can focus on more strategic work.
Exactly. Things like innovation and optimization.
Yeah, let the machines handle the grunt work.
Exactly. And IAC also enables seamless integration with CI/CD pipelines.
CI/CD, so continuous integration and continuous delivery.
You got it. And this is essential for modern software delivery.
Right, because you want to be able to release new features quickly and reliably.
Exactly. And IAC helps automate the infrastructure side of that process.
So you can deploy new infrastructure and applications automatically as part of your CI/CD pipeline?
That's the idea. It's all about streamlining the entire software delivery process.
Very cool. And the ability to create reproducible environments is also a big win, right?
Huge win. So consistent setups for development, testing, and production.
Yeah, that eliminates those weird environment-specific bugs that can be so hard to track down.
Precisely. Everyone's working with the same consistent infrastructure.
And ultimately, all of these benefits contribute to enhanced agility and responsiveness.
Exactly. It's about being able to adapt your infrastructure quickly to changing business needs.
To be able to pivot when you need to.
That's the goal. And the infrastructure as code, IAC.pdf, actually provides a really compelling real-world example.
Okay, let's hear it.
They talk about a financial services company
Okay.
that saw a 30% reduction in deployment times.
Wow, 30%. That's significant.
It is. And they also saw significant security improvements, all thanks to adopting Terraform.
That's impressive. It shows that IAC can have a real impact on the bottom line.
It definitely can. So the why of IAC seems pretty compelling, right?
It does, but I have a feeling there's a but coming.
There is. There always is, right?
There always is. So what are the challenges of adopting IAC? Because it can't all be sunshine and roses.
It can't. And luckily, our first and second PDF sources do a good job of outlining some of the common hurdles that organizations face.
Okay, let's talk about the potential roadblocks.
So one of the first challenges is skill gaps.
Skill gaps meaning people don't know how to use these IAC tools?
Exactly. Teams often lack the necessary expertise in the specific tools, the scripting languages, the overall mindset of managing infrastructure as code.
Yeah, it's a new way of thinking.
It is, and it requires new skills.
So training and upskilling are important.
Absolutely.
Oh,
Another challenge is tool selection.
tool selection. Yeah, we talked about all the different tools out there.
We did. And choosing the right ones for your organization's needs can be tricky.
Because each tool has its own strengths, weaknesses, learning curve.
Exactly.
Okay,
It can be overwhelming.
It can, especially if you're new to IAC.
Yeah, and then there's integration complexity.
Integration complexity.
So implementing ISC often requires aligning these new workflows with your existing DevOps practices, your CI/CD pipelines, your other IT systems.
Right. So it's not just about the tools themselves.
It's about how they fit into your overall IT ecosystem.
And that integration can be complex.
It can. It takes careful planning and execution.
Definitely not a plug-and-play solution.
Not at all. And then there are security concerns.
Security concerns.
So our sources emphasize that if ISC templates are not properly written, managed, and tested,
Yeah.
they can actually introduce security vulnerabilities into your infrastructure.
So it's important to do it right.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You need to have strong security practices in place throughout the entire IAC lifecycle.
Right, because automation doesn't automatically equal security.
It doesn't. You still need to be vigilant.
Makes sense. And what about the initial setup and migration? Is that a challenge?
It can be. So
Yeah.
transitioning from a traditional manual infrastructure management approach to an IAC-based approach,
Yeah.
that can be a significant undertaking.
Because you're basically changing the way you do everything.
You are. It requires time effort, a well-defined migration strategy.
It's a journey, not a sprint.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And finally, Even after you've adopted IEC,
Yeah,
you need to be mindful of configuration drift.
right. We talked about that before.
We did, and it's an ongoing challenge. You need to have monitoring and processes in place to ensure that the actual state of your infrastructure
Yeah.
doesn't deviate from the desired state defined in your code.
So you need to keep things in sync.
Exactly. It's like a constant gardening process.
Okay, so those are some of the key challenges of ISE skill gaps: tool selection, integration complexity, security concerns, initial setup, and migration and managing configuration drift.
You got it. It's a lot to consider.
It is, but the benefits seem to outweigh the challenges.
I think so too.
Okay.
But given these potential hurdles, it's understandable why many organizations seek external help.
Right, bring in the experts.
Exactly.
Hmm.
And all of our PDF sources actually highlight the role that managed service providers or MSPs can play in helping organizations adopt IAC.
MSPs, okay, so like outsourcing your ISC needs.
In a way.
Yeah.
But it's more than just outsourcing. It's about partnering with experts who can guide you through the process.
So what exactly can MSPs do to help with IAC?
So first and foremost, they can provide expert guidance and training.
Right, because skills are a big challenge.
MSPs have in-depth knowledge of various IAC tools and methodologies.
Yeah, they've done this before.
They can offer best practices, tailored training programs, all that good stuff.
So they can help you upskill your team.
Exactly. And they can also offer customized solutions.
Customized solutions because every organization is different.
Precisely. MSPs can design and implement IAC strategies that are specifically tailored to your business goals,
Yeah.
your existing infrastructure, your technology stack.
So it's not a one-size-fits-all approach,
It's not. It's about finding the right solution for you.
and their experience can also help accelerate the implementation process, right?
Absolutely. They can help you get up and running with IAC much faster and with less disruption to your operations.
So you can start realizing those benefits sooner.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And another crucial area where MSPs can add value is security and compliance.
Right. Those are always top of mind.
They are.
Yeah.
So MSPs can help you incorporate security best practices into your IAC templates.
Right.
Conduct thorough security audits and ensure that your infrastructure meets all the relevant industry regulations.
So they can help you stay secure and compliant.
Exactly. And it's not just about the initial setup.
Right.
MSPs often provide ongoing support and optimization.
So it's a long-term partnership.
It can be.
Mm-hmm.
They can continuously monitor your IAC environments, proactively identify and resolve issues, help you optimize costs, and ensure that your infrastructure stays aligned with your business needs.
So it's like having an IAC expert on call.
It is.
Mhm.
And for organizations that are operating in multi-cloud environments,
Yeah, more and more companies are going multi-cloud these days.
they are MSPs with expertise across various cloud platforms can be super helpful.
Right, because managing ISC across multiple clouds can be a challenge.
It can. But MSPs can help you standardize your practices and make sure everything works together smoothly.
So if you're feeling overwhelmed by the prospect of adopting ISC,
Yeah.
remember that there are experts out there who can help.
Exactly. Don't be afraid to reach out to an MSP.
Good advice. Okay, so let's say we've decided to take the plunge into ISC.
Yeah,
What are the key steps involved in actually implementing it?
that's a great question. And our first and second PDF sources actually provide a really helpful roadmap for implementation.
Okay, a step-by-step guide.
So the first step is to define your infrastructure requirements.
Infrastructure requirements.
So you need to figure out exactly which parts of your IT infrastructure you want to automate.
So like servers, networks, storage applications, the whole shebang.
Exactly. It's about being clear on your scope.
Right, you don't have to automate everything at once.
You don't. You can start small and then scale up.
Makes sense. So once you know what you want to automate, what's next?
Then you need to choose the right IEC tool or tools.
Tool selection, back to that again.
It's a crucial step.
Yeah.
And as we discussed earlier, this decision should be based on your specific needs.
Right, your infrastructure, your cloud strategy, your team's skills.
Exactly. There's no one-size-fits-all answer.
And once you've chosen your tools, you need to start writing the actual code right.
You do. So this is where you create those declarative templates or imperative scripts.
Right, the recipe for your infrastructure.
Exactly. And these configurations define the desired state of your infrastructure.
So you're specifying all the necessary settings, dependencies, and so on.
Precisely. It's all in the code.
And before you deploy anything, you need to test it right.
Absolutely. Testing is crucial.
Because you don't want to break anything in production.
You don't. So the fourth step is to test and validate your IEC configurations.
Okay, so how do you test infrastructure code?
So there are automated testing frameworks that you can use.
Okay.
And these frameworks help ensure that your code is correct, that it functions as expected, and that it meets any relevant compliance requirements.
So it's like unit testing for your infrastructure.
It is. It's about catching those errors early on.
And only after you've thoroughly tested your code.